Good morning. It's Sunday, January the 4th, one day after the United States arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife. Yesterday, around this time, we were learning the details of a U.S. military mission involving 150 aircraft, Delta Force soldiers, and an FBI hostage team. They executed strikes across the Venezuelan capital of Caracas, hitting military bases. A Venezuelan official who spoke to the New York Times on the condition of anonymity estimates that 40 people were killed, including civilians and military personnel. A team of helicopters reached what President Trump called Maduro's fortress, where U.S. troops were able to seize Maduro and his wife and remove them from the country. In a firefight at the compound, several U.S. soldiers were injured, but all are in stable condition, according to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. A helicopter was damaged during the escape, but remained flyable. General Kane said no U.S. troops were killed. Maduro and his wife were taken on the warship USS Iwo Jima to Guantanamo Bay, then flown to New York State, transferred by helicopter to Manhattan, and transported to a detention center in Brooklyn. A White House social media account posted this video of Maduro in New York yesterday. No members of Congress were notified in advance of the operation, and dozens have questioned the constitutionality of it, including some Republicans. And that's the easy stuff to follow. Then at a midday press conference yesterday, President Trump said this.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
No dates were mentioned there. The president was much more focused on Venezuela's hefty oil supply, referring to it about 25 times during the press conference. Than he was with Maduro's alleged cocaine trafficking, with which he's actually being charged, or the subversion of democracy in Venezuela. Trump claimed Venezuela had stolen oil that belonged to the United States and said he wanted the biggest oil companies in the world to return to Venezuela. But immediately, the administration was peppered with questions about who exactly would be running Venezuela on behalf of the United States and how. President Trump referred to the group behind him, consisting of the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Despite the U.S. government's claim that Maduro was illegitimately leading the country and that several of his closest officials also participated in the trafficking operation that Maduro allegedly led, President Trump acknowledged he'd be willing to work with Venezuela's Vice President, Delcy Rodriguez, who assumed the role of interim president yesterday. That's tricky, too, because in a televised address to the Venezuelan nation, Rodriguez said that Maduro was the country's only president and that the nation would, quote, not be anyone's colony. Joining me now is my friend Mehdi Hasan, longtime journalist and now CEO and editor-in-chief of Zateo. I don't even know where to start with you, Mehdi. There's so many things here. I guess I would start with the fact that U.S. presidents often obfuscate about what the real reason is for an invasion or a decapitation or something like that. At least Trump didn't do that. He didn't mention democracy at all during his press conference. He mentioned oil 25 times.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Ali, and thanks for having me on. Happy New Year, though it feels weird as usual at the beginning of any year that Trump is in office. I would say that, you know, those of us who are old enough, you and I, to remember the Iraq War in 2003, people like myself who claimed that Bush and Cheney went into Iraq for oil, we were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. They said it was no, WMDs, Al-Qaeda, democracy. Trump isn't doing that. People who claim this isn't about oil just need to listen to Donald Trump speaking or Peter Hegseth speaking. They're all being or Stephen Miller, they're all being very open about this, that it is about oil. Donald Trump has been obsessed with Venezuela's oil for a decade now, as I outlined in a piece for Zateo yesterday. Anthony McCabe, who was the deputy director of the FBI, wrote a memoir in 2019 where he said Trump had said at the time in his first term, why aren't we invading Venezuela? They're the country with all the oil. So he's been obsessed with oil in Venezuela since his first term. He hasn't hidden it, as you pointed out, with all those references yesterday. It's actually outrageous. This is 19th century imperial plunder to say we're going to go into another country and we're going to steal all the oil, which is a phrase he used for Iraq. He also said that it will pay for itself. And again, sorry to bring up Iraq, but Ali, you remember George Bush.
No, but this is important because this was the big selling point for Iraq, that this whole thing will pay for itself. The oil that we get out of the ground in Iraq will pay for the military action and the stabilization of Iraq.
And Paul Wolfowitz said it, Donald Rumsfeld said it, George Bush said it, Dick Cheney said it. Actually, Iraq ended up costing the American taxpayer between $2 and $3 trillion. Experts on Venezuela say just rebuilding the oil industry there will cost between 50 and 60 billion. It's going to take several years. But Trump is claiming it's our oil, which is so outrageous, and every American should be outraged by that. By the way, you mentioned drugs. Let's just talk about drugs for a moment. He's being charged in New York for cocaine trafficking. No mention of fentanyl in the indictment, which we were told was the big reason to blow up boats in the Caribbean. It's cocaine now. And here's the problem for Donald Trump here, which is he just pardoned the former president of Honduras, who wasn't just indicted for cocaine trafficking. He was convicted in American court, sentenced to 45 years. In prison for 45 years, and Donald Trump just a few months ago pardoned the former president of Honduras, who trafficked 400 tons of cocaine into the U.S. So this idea that it's about cocaine is also absurd. And I would also point out, for those of you who haven't read the indictment, Nicolas Maduro is also being charged with machine gun possession, which I find hilarious from a Republican administration that is obsessed with allowing weapons of war on our streets. Apparently, you can't have guns. You have to have guns in America, but a foreign leader has to abide by some 1934 American Firearms Act. Bizarre.
So I want to put up a chart that you had a version of talking about how much oil Venezuela has. It's actually got the world's largest reserves of oil in billions of barrels, 303 billion barrels. Just to compare, Saudi Arabia has 267, Iran has 209, Iraq has 145 billion barrels, America has 45 billion barrels. This is oil reserves. This is not readily available necessarily, but it's the oil available. This is important because the vice president, who is now apparently the acting president of Venezuela, has said we will be no one's colony. This chart is the history of American colonialism or British colonialism, right? It's that countries have resources. We don't really care about the status of your government or your good governance or democracy or freedom or liberty. We care about your stuff.
Of course, and Donald Trump, the only difference between Donald Trump and his predecessors is that Trump is very open about it. He's very brazen about it. He's unashamed about it. Look, all American presidents have allied with dictators, going back to FDR meeting the Saudi king after World War II to do a deal with the Saudis over oil. The difference with Donald Trump is that he embraces MBS in a way that other American presidents might not praise MBS, and he embraces dictators around the world, even dictators of countries that we're supposedly, adversaries with. He loves the North Korean dictator. He said it himself. I wrote him love letters. So Trump is very open about the fact that he doesn't care about democracy, he doesn't care about human rights. He's happy to ally with all sorts of dictators as long as you do what he wants. And I wonder why Maduro didn't just offer him the oil and a Trump Tower in Caracas, which would probably have saved his position. And you mentioned the vice president. Yes, she's saying all this stuff, but people who are much more expert on Venezuela than me are saying that actually she's almost certainly done a deal with the American government, or in the process of doing a deal. And Rubio hinted at this yesterday, for her to stay in power, for the rest of the regime and the government to stay in power, because they haven't come out and said the entire government should go. They haven't got everyone else who's accused of drug trafficking in the Venezuelan government. And by the way, Donald Trump has thrown Mariana Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize winning Venezuelan opposition.
I want to underscore this. She won the Nobel. The opposition is largely coalesced around her. Opposition is a tricky term in Venezuela because it's not a monolith, but they've largely coalesced around her. One would have thought that he would say, and we have this woman waiting in the wings, and she's ready to take over. He basically threw her under the bus during the press conference yesterday in favor of the sitting vice president of Venezuela.
Yeah, it's classic Donald Trump, where he basically upsets everyone and pisses off everyone. See, you're the opposition are thinking this is going to be our moment. He throws the opposition leader under the bus. By the way, with Donald Trump, it's always personal. He's been annoyed that she won the Nobel Peace Prize that he thought was his. That's what this is about. Let's be very open about it. Trump is annoyed at this woman for winning a prize that he thought he should have, even though she sucked up to him, she dedicated the prize to him, she started talking like him. Doesn't matter. Donald Trump will throw everyone under the bus. He threw her under the bus. So he's got rid of Maduro. He's upset the global South, a lot of the developing world, a lot of those of us who believe in international law and national sovereignty, and at the same time he hasn't appeased or made the Venezuelan opposition abroad happy, because he hasn't put their people in power either. So he's just done what the oil companies want. Let's be honest, he promised American oil companies a lot of money if they voted for him, if they endorsed him, if they donated to him during the campaign, and this is a reward. And I think more Democrats, more people should be pointing out this oil argument is not some conspiracy theory. It's happening in plain sight. And I noticed someone like James Tallarico, who's running for the Senate in Texas, made this argument very eloquently on social media yesterday. I think more Democrats need to be pointing this brazen corruption out. Americans don't want our military and our government to go to war in general. They certainly don't want to go to war for some 19th century imperialist project.
By the way, Donald Trump brought up the Nobel Peace Prize again, or at least the idea that he keeps on solving wars. He upped it to 8 1/4 conflicts that he ended. He actually said this yesterday, talking about Cambodia and Thailand. That's the core.
Can I just say, I mean, can we finally put this BS to bed that Donald Trump is the peace president, he's anti-war, he's isolationist, he's on a neocon. This man bombed 7 countries, Ali, last year. 7 countries. I can't think of an American president in living memory who bombed 7 countries in a year. Nigeria, Somalia, Yemen, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Venezuela. He bombed these countries in 1 year. And then he begins the new year threatening Iran. He said, we're locked and loaded. And then he starts, January 3rd, bombs Venezuela and basically kidnaps the president. And I'm glad, Ali, that you, unlike a lot of other journalists, didn't use the words arrested or detained or captured, because the United States has no authority to do what it did on Saturday. We are not the world's police force. We don't have jurisdiction to go into other countries and just grab their leaders and the first lady of that country and bring them to us. Think about how absurd that is. Does that mean
one of your reporters
can now indict Trump in their courts and send a SEAL team in here?
One of your reporters published something yesterday afternoon which was very specific. It says there are very specific conditions under which a country can cross into another country to take military action, let alone kidnapping their leader. They're very specific. This is not gray area at all.
Yeah. So J.D. Vance claimed yesterday that the legal rationale for this operation was that the DOJ had indicted him. This was a law enforcement operation, which is absurd. Think about that. Can a future American president, can a Democratic president now come in and say, hey, Bukele in El Salvador, don't like him. Let's indict him and send in SEAL Team 6 to get him. Can a foreign country indict Donald Trump in their domestic courts and send in their special forces into D.C. to try and grab the president of the U.S.? This is madness. No one accepts the legal basis for this. And by the way, J.D. Vance, Tulsi Gabbard, all these people spent years saying we're against regime change wars. We're against intervening in Venezuela in Gabbard's case. Where is Tulsi Gabbard right now? Why is J.D. Vance not resigning on principle? What happened to all these people who said Trump would end the endless wars?
So one of the interesting things about this is whether or not you can go into another country to do any of these things. You point out that if you let this happen, there are real consequences to this. And you write about China and Taiwan. You said on Blue Sky. Yeah. If Xi Jinping invaded Taiwan right now and toppled the president, on what grounds would the United States object or have any credibility to say anything? I mean, simple question. Xi Jinping and his people must be studying this very closely to say, are they going to be able to say that we can't go into Taiwan?
So here's what's interesting. I mentioned earlier that Donald Trump is no different to his predecessors, except that he basically is much more brazen and open about what is going on. But at least his predecessors pretended. There is some value in pretense, Ali, to at least pretend that you're trying to adhere to international law, to at least publicly say we do support international institutions and we support international democratic legal norms. Trump, and by the way, Netanyahu over the last year burning down the post-war architecture of international law will have very real and damaging long-term consequences. We have zero credibility tomorrow to say anything to anyone. And maybe Donald Trump doesn't care, but future American presidents, the American public may care if Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and others say, well, you know what? The US can do it, we can do it. If Israel can do it, we can do it. If all of these Western powers can do it, we can do it.